Good evening and welcome to the hundreds of people who've already joined us this evening. So nice to see you all here. And a big welcome, first of all, to Jade Kirkle. Jade, let's turn on your microphone. Great to see you. And Cheryl Cohen, great to have you back. I see we've got Louis already on the panel as well. Jade, thank you so much for putting all of this together. It's just a mammoth undertaking, as I'm sure you've discovered over the last week or so.
Yes, no, absolutely. But I'm just so thrilled that you were on board when I called you and gave me this platform. So thanks, Howie. I'm looking forward to tonight.
Well, it's such an amazing topic that we're so excited that we could actually address the issue of racism in such an important way and in a different way to in which other people are actually talking about it. So really excited about tonight. And Cheryl, welcome back. This is your second panel with us.
Thanks, Howard. It's lovely to see you again.
What has changed since we last spoke? Are people more traumatized now than ever?
Say again?
Are people more traumatized now than ever?
Yes, I think in the first 3 weeks, we had no school, we had no outings, we had no open shopping and shopping centers, and we had no coronavirus. So life has changed.
So when you're seeing patients now, are they anxious about going to school or anxious about staying home?
Yes, tremendous amounts of anxiety.
Going to school? And is it from the parents or is it from the kids?
I would say that there's a combination. I suppose that with children, whenever there's anxiety with a child, either it's not that parents are the problem, they're often the solution, but it plays on the relationship. So it happens really between parent and child. And very much children are presenting with their own anxieties. For example, there's some children who worried that they have had coronavirus family members, they've recovered, and they worry to go back to school that other children won't play with them. You know, that's a very, very specific child-centered worry.
Are you seeing any stigmatization of kids who've had corona at all?
I'm seeing it more as a fear than in children than as an actual acted out behavioral element. So I'm finding that the worry about being stigmatized is greater than the actual presentation of it.
And in terms of people's general mental health over the last few months, have you seen a distinct deterioration?
I have. I think that there's been a greater capacity for splitting, which I'm sure we're going to touch on tonight a lot, in that parents and people, I suppose generally, want to know that this is not going to affect me, that they want to divide the world into us and them. So, I've been careful, you haven't been careful. Where did you go? What did you touch? What irresponsible behavior did you display that makes me feel safe, so I don't have to worry about getting the virus? So I think there's been a very much a splitting response or defense mechanism in coping with distress. And of course, this is not a helpful strategy because it's a fantasy, it's not true, and B, it undermines other people's, disrespects them and undermines their ability to make their own informed, enlightened decisions.
Interesting. Jade, how are your kids coping at the moment?
I have 3 girls, Howie, and 2 out of 3 are okay. And I have one that is suffering from anxiety around it. She doesn't want to go outside. She doesn't know where the virus is. She kind of thinks it's like Jaws, the sharks movie. You know it's there, but you can't see it. So I'm going to certainly have to address it with her at some stage. She is 3, so she's quite small, but she's definitely felt some effects of it. She's quite around all of us when we go out.
Jade, you're just freezing there at the moment. I don't know if anyone in your home is busy using YouTube or anything like that, but we're going to have to try see if we can get as much bandwidth dedicated to you as possible. So if the rest of the family is busy playing PUBG or something like that, tell them to stop and tell them to rather come watch you in person.
It's probably my daughter on TikTok, Howie.
So is my bandwidth okay?
Just
David's on another, he's doing a presentation for a short while on another platform, so another meeting. So
no, yours is absolutely perfect. So nothing to worry about there. And we want to welcome, we've got about 300 people who've tuned in already, and we've got about 10 minutes to go before we begin. And until we start, we generally have a very informal chat to some of our panelists and talk about what's happening in their lives and what's happening generally. I mean, are you guys seeing any other discussions other than COVID? And in some way, people said to me, thank goodness for Black Lives Matter, because at least it's detracted away a little from the single issue of COVID and has given us other things to focus on and be concerned about.
Yeah, I think that this is a time where predisposing difficulties do surface as well. And we know that race and gender issues are surfacing, but they've always been there as well. They're not new to us. So for me, on a communal or global level, just like these issues are being touched on and these vulnerabilities are being exposed, I think our other vulnerabilities on a personal level are also exposed, whether it's relationship worries or worry about health or worry about money. All those things are surfacing now.
Yeah. Jade, you mentioned to me that when you started on this topic, it was like going down a rabbit warren. That now that you begin looking at the issue of race, you're reading books, you listening to podcasts, you watching movies, you reading people's blogs. Tell us about your journey that you've been on a little, and where has it taken you?
Yes, no, Howie, I've been on a rabbit hole that would put Alice in Wonderland to shame on this topic of racism. I have read more in the last 2 weeks than I probably have in my entire life. And I've actually signed up to Edwin Moore's 21-day racism challenge, which I'm on day 8 now, and has really, really, really opened up my eyes. The challenge is all around every single day. You've got to choose to do one thing, whether it's read a book by a person of color, watch a video by a person of color, or listen to a podcast, or reflect on something, or notice something, or act on something, and you've got to diarize it for 21 days. And it's really helping to start looking at it from a person of color's perspective. And the more I read, the more I understand, and the more I understand, the more I can help my children understand as well, which is obviously why we're here tonight, which is so important for me.
That's fantastic. So we're talking to our audience before we go live at 8 o'clock, and I see we joined now by Lael Bethlehem. Lael, welcome. Lovely to have you.
Hello, Howard. Hello, everybody. Great to be here.
It's fantastic to see you, and a big happy birthday to your mother, who
Thank you so much.
Turned 80 on the weekend.
That's right. You know, absolutely amazing.
And of course, your mother, Marlene Bethlehem, is the person who broke all the glass ceilings of communal leadership within our community.
You know, she really did. So she was the first person to be the chair, or the president, I guess it was, of the South African Jewish Board of Deputies.
First woman.
The first woman. And I think it was, like, at the time, a complete shock to people that a woman could occupy that position. And then I think she also did a great job. So I think she did really open the way for women in our community.
And of course, you've continued in that amazing tradition. How are things going at HCI at the moment? It can't be easy.
Not easy. I won't say any of it is easy. But I always said to my mom that when I was growing up, I never got the email that said that women or girls were supposed to be at home, or they were supposed to be in the kitchen, or they were supposed to not work, or they were supposed to think first and foremost about marriage, or they were supposed to not be leaders. I just didn't get the mail. It didn't occur to me that that's what you were supposed to do. So I just carried on, because I had never had that message. And I think that's a great gift that my mother gave me.
Fantastic. Well, and probably not just your mother, probably your father as well.
No, absolutely. So my dad,
that's a great stalwart of our community too.
No, that is right. So we were just saying on Sunday, actually, that all that my mom has done in the community, she's been able to do because my dad has been, like, not only so supportive, but right in there with her. And because he's shared a value system with her, and because he's believed in her, and because he, with his wife and with his daughters and with his granddaughters, never for a moment felt that we should be anything but who we were. So yeah, I must say I've been very blessed to have my parents.
And of course, we're going to be joined tonight by your daughter as well, Lulu, who's 18 years old.
Right, so she's sitting next to me and we're just trying to figure out whether she should be on a separate screen or on the screen, but she's here with me.
Fantastic. We'll get back to you a little later, and let's welcome Pierre onto the panel as well. Pierre, we've got about 400 people watching us already.
Wow.
It's about 5 minutes to go before we go live, so we just have a very informal chat to all of the people that we're going to be seeing a little later. Welcome, and nice to have you on the panel. Whoever I spoke to, your name kept on coming up as the person we wanted to talk to about the issue of racism. Tell us why.
Okay. Well, I've been doing quite a bit of work in this space, not only at my university, but I've been involved in a 3 to 4 year project at a school where my brother teaches, taking the teachers and the learners through a whole series of workshops and processes to explore questions of race amongst other factors. And I've been involved in the transformation committee at my university, which is the University of Pretoria. And I think, I suppose I've done quite a bit of work on myself in thinking about questions around privilege and what it means to be a white person of a particular background and history. I mean, something that I often say about myself is that I was marinated in the apartheid system, and that has shaped me in particular ways. And a lot of my adult life is about undoing that work. So I suppose that's some of the stuff that I've been working with and thinking about.
And at the University of Pretoria, tell us what you do.
Deputy Director of the Centre for Sexualities, AIDS and Gender, which is a hell of a long name to remember. But essentially, I'm helped to manage and direct our program.
That's amazing. Well, thank you for joining us. We're going to go live in about 3 or 4 minutes. We're just waiting for people to join us. And a big welcome to Kevin Carroll, who joins us from the United States. Kevin, great to see you. Whereabouts in the world are you?
Portland, Oregon. So Jelani and I are in the same city. So it's great. And Pierre, so I spoke at Freedom Park before it opened in Pretoria.
Wow.
I actually was the first speaker in the park.
And some of the work I've been doing with University of Pretoria students is I take them on a day-long experience of Freedom Park, and we then unpack our histories and how they've framed how we understand South African identity today. So it's a very big part of my work, actually.
Oh, that's brilliant. Yeah, I spoke to all the student leaders from the schools there in the park. Yeah, so they organized that. I was there doing some work in Joburg. And I've spent a lot of time actually in South Africa. So I got to hear Archbishop Tutu tell the Invictus story before the movie came out. Yes. Before the film came out, he actually told that at a conference we were speaking at. And he gave me a little nickname. So I'm the little man with the hook, because I was the host of the show. So he would always say, cut it off when you see the little man with the hook. Right. So I adore South Africa. I've spent so much time there. And there's a school down in Cape Town that actually used my book. I think it's called Sun Country School or Sun School, something like that.
Not sure, but you know something. When next you come back, you'll invite us when you go to the school, and we'll come join you.
That would be fantastic. We should do that.
Amazing. It's summer now in Portland, Oregon. What's the weather like outside?
It's beautiful. Our summers are super mild. It's summer here. Officially, first day was the 21st, and so we have really mild weather, and it's just it'll be 75 degrees Fahrenheit. Almost zero humidity. Yeah, so it's quite pleasant right now.
Fantastic. Well, welcome. Amazing to have you with us. And Lulu, a big welcome to you as well. Now we can see you on camera. Although I'm embarrassed to say the last time I saw you, you were much, much younger than you are today.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Your mother has clearly been keeping us apart for probably the last 10 years or so.
Too long.
Much too long, but it's fantastic to have you. You're going to be joining us a little later. We've got some very interesting questions for you. But not only that, your grandmother shared with us a video that you did on June the 16th. And with your permission, we would love to play it tonight as well, because it was the most moving, remarkable thing that I've seen in a long time.
Thank you. Yeah, of course you can play it.
Thank you so much. We now have about 600 people busy watching us at the moment. We'll have more people busy joining us. For those of you not used to it, there's absolutely no reason to be worried about that at all. But I did want to welcome absolutely everyone onto the panel. We are going to go live actually now. So a huge welcome to everyone. And I want, as you are thanking of everything that we do. But before we do that, Dan, tonight's broadcast has in fact been sponsored by Capability BPO. And Dan, you always share with us a set of slides that Capability BPO have provided to us. So just for those of you who don't know, Capability BPO offers a diverse set of BPO services to private and public sector clients, both to domestic and in the international market. Detin, which is part of Capability BPO, is a professional financial services business that specializes in debt recovery and credit control solutions to public and private institutions operating in their own specialist debt collecting contact centers and creating unique strategies for its clients in order to significantly improve their collection results. Dan, I don't know what happened to our slides.
Howie, the slides were up and then they finished. So I took them down.
No, please don't let them finish. They really should come back. So if we can do that, just so I can repeat for people, Detin is a professional financial services business that specializes in debt recovery and credit control solutions to public and private institutions operating in specialist debt collection contact centers and creating unique strategies for its clients in order to specifically improve their collection results. So if you have any queries, if you'd like the services of Capability BPO or Detin, there's only one person to contact, and that person is Mark Essie. Dan, I know his contact details are on the slideshow, which has once again disappeared. So if you could please bring them back, because we want people to contact Mark Essie, who is the CEO of both Capability BPO and Detin, and he will assist you with solutions tailor-made for your specific business requirements, bringing the expertise of his entire team to your back office. Dan, so can we show, in fact, the details of Mark Essie?
Yeah, I'm going to pull up his slides, but they're on like an automatic roller, so they keep. Yeah, I'll post it in the chat. It's easier for people to be able to contact him.
Please, if you could do that. But just a huge thank you to everyone from Capability BPO and Detin for sponsoring tonight's broadcast. So I'd love to welcome you all here, all of our panelists. There are more panelists who will be joining us during this evening. And a special thank you to Dan Stillerman, who, as you know, works all the gears behind the scenes, make sure that we broadcast successfully all over the place. We're broadcasting tonight on YouTube as well as on Zoom. We currently have about 640 people watching us on Zoom, and I haven't checked how our figures are doing on YouTube at the moment, but we are expecting a big crowd tonight for this unbelievably important topic that we're going to be discussing. So before we actually begin, we have a few webinars coming up. We want to talk about Saturday night's webinar. We have about 12 artists singing the rock and roller coaster of Jewish music through the ages from Streisand to Shweki. So we'll be going through, Dan is going to show you what it looks like, but we'll be going on an unbelievable journey through the history of Jewish music, and it's going to be great fun. I'm not sure if we're doing any Lenny Kravitz or any Pink, but we're certainly going to be doing some amazing stuff on Saturday night, 8 o'clock. So please register if you haven't yet registered for that one. And on Sunday evening, we're actually debating the issue of what's happening in Israel at the moment. Is this annexation, unilateral annexation, or alternatively, is the sovereignty over province land? And we've managed to get the ex-mayor of Jerusalem, a member of the Israeli Knesset, Nir Barkat, together with Yair Golan, who is Deputy Chief of Staff at the Israel Defense Forces. we have them on a debate. Yair Golan belongs to the Meretz Party, a fairly left human rights party. Nir Barkat belongs to Likud, a right of center group, and we're going to be facilitated by Paula Sleer, who is an international war correspondent and broadcaster from RT, and of course one of South Africa's favorite journalists as well. So please join us on Sunday night for that as well. I can also tell you, coming up on Wednesday night next week, we're going to be talking about gender-based violence on a panel that really brings together some of the biggest experts in South Africa on the topic of gender-based violence. So Dan, a huge thank you to you, and I wanted to as well thank Danny Kadar. Danny often gets very little credit, but none of the design work, a lot of the behind-the-scene work happens because Danny Kadar, the CEO of the South African Jewish Report, is making sure that all of the things happen really smoothly. So a huge thank you to Danny Kadar as well. Tonight, not only do we have some amazing panels, but we have polls for you to answer. So throughout the evening, we're going to be posting, Dan, I think 4 or 5 polls that we're going to be asking your opinion on what you think relating to race relations, Black Lives Matter, and all of these polls, Dan, we've set up to be anonymous. So no one can see how you vote on any of them, and we hope that in fact will allow you to be completely honest in your views. You will also notice that at the bottom of your screen, you have a number of buttons. If you want to chat, please click on chat, and you can chat with everyone who's busy watching. And we now have about 700 people on Zoom, and we're not quite sure yet how many people we have on YouTube. But you can chat using the chat button, but you can also ask a question. There's a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Use that to ask questions to any members of the panel. So I don't know if you know, but in fact, Jade, your father, who just so happens to be a very famous entrepreneur in South Africa, Ian Furr, the man who started Sorbet and Sorbet Man, Ian Furr is now with the Hatch Institute, and he's been involved in race relations for most of his working life. And he's about to launch a new course called Understanding and Overcoming Racial Bias in South Africa. And Ian has been kind enough to offer us 5 free spots worth 4,900 Rand each at, in fact, the Hatch Institute for this course on overcoming racial bias in South Africa. And Dan, you are officially now appointed the judge. At the end of this evening, you are going to tell us who asked your 5 favorite questions, and we'll be giving them away as prizes to people. Thanks very much to Ian Furr and the Hatch Institute. So amazing. Thank you very much, Ian, for doing that for us. So Dan, we're now going to begin, and I'm going to ask you, our panelists, we can either take off or we can ask them to turn off their cameras, and we'll tell them when to turn their cameras back on. But Jade, I want to start with you. First, thank you for putting together a remarkable panel this evening. You came up with this idea about probably 10 days ago. You said, I have issues. I need to speak to my children about race. I don't quite know how to do it. So I've started reading. I've started reading about Kevin Carroll. I've started reading about Jelani Memory. I've started doing things, but I need some help. So Jade, tell us why you wanted us to put this panel together.
Thanks, Howie. I'm going to start off by saying that I'm no expert in race relations. I have neither studied it nor taught it. So I'm on the panel tonight pretty much as the one thing that I am qualified to speak of as, and that's as a mother whose 7-year-old daughter, Maya, has a TikTok account, so perhaps not that qualified. But about 2 weeks ago, she came to me and she said, Mommy, who is George Floyd and why is everybody posting Black Lives Matter? I have shielded a few questions in my life, but this one hit me like a ton of bricks. And I found myself at a crossroad. You know, do I take her down this scary road of injustice and discrimination and murder, basically? Or do I choose easy street and try and protect her from the harsh realities of the world out there? And something else hit me even harder. And that was that option to choose what to tell her was privilege. And if I didn't tell her about it, what wrongful conclusion would she have come to on her own accord? So I have 3 daughters, and I would love to raise children that are brave and thoughtful and informed about race. And when I think of my childhood and the way that my parents brought me up to be anti-racist, there was so many examples, but a really small one is, the racial slurs or derogatory names were completely forbidden at my dinner table. As you mentioned, when I was 10 or so, my father started a race relations business where he helped corporates transition into democracy. And even through that process, I was exposed to incredible people and incredible stories. Overall, I grew up anti-racist, and I thought that that would be enough until I realized that my daughter knows nothing about it. White people in South Africa, I think, are very scared about talking about racism, especially to our children. It's difficult, it's uncomfortable, and it's actually often deemed as unnecessary. But we all know that racism is very much alive in our country today. And it's very hard to fix what we're afraid to discuss. So I went on a web search and how to talk to my daughter about racism. And I searched for ways on the internet, and I came across this website called A Kid's Book About. And I found a lot of titles on there, some really fascinating, challenging topics. And I downloaded the one called A Kid's Book About Racism. And I read it to my daughter, and it really started a fascinating conversation. So much so that I decided to email the publishers in America with the subject line, "White South African parents need to hear from you." And surprisingly, they got in touch and they said, "We'd love to join the conversation." And that's Kevin and Jelani that we'll hear from a bit later. But I was really grateful that they agreed to do this. And thank you, Howie, for the platform. I have so many thoughts on it, and I can't wait to unpack it with this incredible panel that we have tonight.
Amazing, Jade. Well, thank you so much for coming up with the idea. Thanks for co-hosting tonight with us, and really thank you for all your efforts in putting all of this together.
Thanks,
so,
Howard.
Pierre, if we can ask you to turn on your camera, please. We're joined by Professor Pierre Brouard. Pierre, you are at the University of Pretoria, and your camera is just loading at the moment. But whoever I asked, I said to people, I want to understand, why do we have racism in the world? What is it innately within human beings that looks for the difference in someone else and tries to do something because someone else is different? Why does racism exist?
Thank you. Thanks very much for the opportunity to be here. I think this is an incredibly important conversation that we're having in South Africa at the moment. I'd like to make 2 caveats before I give my view. Firstly, I think who talks about racism matters. As a white person, I would have to acknowledge that I'm steeped in my own socialization and my own conscious, unconscious set of views. And in that sense, I have my own work to do, and I can be an ally in the work around racism. But I cannot speak for the experience of Black people. I think Black people are their own experts on racism. And I think that it's important for me to acknowledge that I cannot appropriate the experience of racism of people of color. I think the second caveat that I would like to mention is that we're probably going to focus mostly on what might be called interactional racism tonight, the kind of casual racism of everyday interactions. But I think my view, and many other people in the panel probably agree, that racism is historical, it's systemic, it's structural, it's sort of wired into the functioning of our societies going back to slavery. So when we think about understanding it, we have to have that bigger picture in our mind. I'd like to sort of share a fascinating anecdote that a friend shared with me. And I think it encapsulates some of the struggle that we're talking about this evening. So a Black friend of mine moved into an apartment in Pretoria East. It's a kind of one of those semi-gated communities. And he was moving in, and his dad was helping him. And as they came out of his apartment and were walking down a flight of stairs, a young white boy and his dad met them on the stairwell. And the boy who spoke in Afrikaans said to my friend in Afrikaans, "What are you doing here?" And then he turned to his father and said in Afrikaans, "What are they doing here? They don't live here." And he kept saying to his dad, "What's going on?" And then he turned to my friend and said, "You people must leave." The father clearly got very flustered. And when my friend challenged what the little boy was saying, he said, "He's just a kid. He doesn't understand English very well. We're from Kimberley, and he's not used to living with other people. We don't see race in our family." And he was very embarrassed by what had happened. And I would argue that his embarrassment was because he realized that what had happened was that in many ways, his little boy had been taught racial attitudes in a multitude of ways. That in essence, he was brought up in a racist context. But I also think that we think about that home as being shaped by the broader community and the broader society and the history of South Africa. So the kinds of things I think that this little boy observed or heard, which shaped his views, would be the kinds of things such as how his parents or his family or his community spoke to and about Black people, how they related to them in the home, when there was television was playing in the home, when they interacted in commercial spaces, how they spoke to Black people and how they spoke about Black people. Then secondly, I would say how his parents explained or talked about the lives, the stories, and the circumstances of Black South Africans. Were they presented as other in stereotypical ways? Were Black people presented as being responsible for their own poverty, for example? Did they talk about Black people as needing to live in separate areas? Because clearly he had this idea that Black and white people didn't live together. How were the history of his family and his people as an Afrikaans community shared with him? What stories were told, what stories were not told? Sometimes I've encountered in my work stories of victimhood, of white victimhood, can emerge in race conversations. And so maybe that little boy imbibed ideas like that. He would have observed who his family are living with. If they don't live with any Black people around them as neighbors, for example, he's imbibing a particular message. Who did his friends or his parents socialize with? Who did they not socialize with? What about his play school, for example, if he went to one? Were there racial hierarchies of power in that space? What we often observe in South African contexts is that you might find white people in positions of power and authority, and Black people in positions of subservience and having less power. You pick up a message from that. How did his parents talk about race and racism? Did they give him a language and a vocabulary to think about it? Because now we're coming to understand that it's not enough just to say we don't have a racist home, but actually we have to teach our children consciously to be non-racist, and also to recognize the importance of race. Because I think many on the panel would agree that race is not a biological truth, but it is a sociological truth. And to say to people of color, race is an ephemera, that it is not, it isn't biological, can be a form of gaslighting in some ways, because we're saying to them, the experiences you have as a person of color aren't real. But of course they are real. So there's an interesting tension there. How did his parents talk about privilege, for example? Did they even mention, I think Jade used the word privilege earlier, the privilege about conversations around having them or not having them in relation to your child? Because I think many people, particularly in the United States, Black parents will have that conversation about what to do, for example, if as a young Black man you're stopped by a policeman or a policewoman. How do you conduct yourself? That is a conversation about survival. many white parents won't have to have that conversation with their children. So there's a privilege that is operating there. So, and then finally, how did his family, this little boy's parents and his family, talk about other forms of difference? Did they talk about gender, sexuality, class, religion, foreignness, body size, how people looked? Because I think that would frame and shape his understanding of difference. Were those conversations of compassion, conversations of understanding, conversations of nuance? Because then I think all of these things that I'm talking about are conscious and unconscious ways that that little boy has learned very powerful messages of race, even if his parents had not explicitly said anything to him about Black South Africans, for example. So, you know, my core message here would be that no one is born racist. We learn about race, and we learn about it through what we see, what we observe, and what is going on around us. I do think that as a species, we are wired in some ways to notice difference. And many parents will say their kids will talk about, you know, why is so-and-so black, or why is so-and-so got this kind of hair. It's what we do with that information about difference that makes a difference.
Peter,
if you think about infants.
Let me stop you there for a minute, because I'm going to ask Dan Stillerman, in fact, to put on a poll, because we've got a poll specifically to ask parents, when did their kids first mention an issue of race to their family? How old, how young were them? And while you're talking, we're just going to ask people to actually vote to understand, have their kids never mentioned race to them? Were they very young at the time? Were they teenagers? Let's just actually find out from our audience exactly when it took. So we'll give people about 1 minute while you're talking, just to be able to vote, and then we'll talk about the results coming through as well. A question that came up, I spoke to a psychologist in the week about our panel, and I said, you know, the idea is, how do you stop having racist kids? And his answer was very specific. You said it's very simple. You stop having racist parents, and then you will not have racist kids. But is it that simple?
Well, I think yes, because probably if you ask those parents, are you racist? They would say they're not. And I think the question of white defensiveness is pertinent here. I mean, in my own work, when I do race work with conversations about difference and about privilege, because I'm a person of a certain age, having reached my 60th year fairly recently, I'm a product of apartheid. So although I consider myself woke and I'm doing the work, my own work around race, I cannot say, I believe, that don't have a racist bone in my body. In fact, I think it's more important for me to say that because I was steeped in that system, I am unconsciously racist at certain times in my life, and my work is to undo that. So children will learn about race from their parents, and they will learn racist ideas. And, you know, people might think I'm not a racist, but in fact, if you participated in racial ideas in particular ways, then I would have to say, perhaps you are racist. And perhaps admitting that, acknowledging that, is the first step towards changing that.
So we're actually going to ask that question in another moment, but let's just, Jade, maybe turn on your microphone and let's look at some of these results that have come back. At what age did your kids first mention the issue of race to you? And 28% of people say they've never ever mentioned it at all. About 20% under 5, 27% 5 to 10, 8% 10 to 15. After 15, apparently, it's already decided. Jade, your child who asked you the question, how old?
She's 7, and she's on social media as well. So when you were talking earlier, Howie, about how if our parents are not racist, then we won't be racist, I absolutely agree. But I also believe that there are so many other factors out there that are influencing our kids, that they're exposed to other people's views, what's happening online. And exactly what Pierre was saying, it's really about actually consciously having that conversation. So not leaving anything over to assumption. I'm not sure, and maybe Cheryl can talk about it later, if as you get older, does it start becoming more entrenched in your kids? Is it better to start at a younger age? That's out of my field of expertise. But what I do know is I completely agree with Pierre, is we have to start this conscious conversation.
So, Pierre, can I ask a question that Jade and I were discussing, and Gavin Metz has really posed it. He said, why do we have to discriminate between race when all members of the same race, the human race? But is our objective here to be colorblind, or is our objective to in fact recognize that we have people of different hues and we need to celebrate and accept and rejoice in the diversity that we have?
Yes, I think often, you know, in the work that I've done, many white people would say, often very proudly, I'm colorblind and I raise my children to be colorblind. And my response to that often is to say, what you're doing is that you're not recognizing the histories that people of different colors bring to their own story, histories of hurt and histories of harm. So when you talk about color blindness, in effect, what you're saying is, I don't recognize those histories of discrimination, prejudice that you and your people have experienced. So color is a reality, you know, I mean, it is a part of all our lives. I think it is much more important to be color sensitive, but in noticing difference, it's not about attributing negativity to those differences, but seeing them as important, I think, and it's acknowledging the histories and stories that people bring, which is based on how they were treated based on their color.
So I'm going to ask Dan to, in fact, pull up a poll, because we have a poll specifically on this. We're asking people, do you consider yourself colorblind? Do you say, no, I'm not colorblind, but I recognize different? Or do you say, how racist are you? And once again, I'm going to ask people to try to be honest, because this is completely anonymous. We have some interesting comments coming in. Bartu says, children see color, but they are not necessarily negative about the differences unless their parents are. We have to stop the idea of being colorblind, but rather to acknowledge that everyone matters regardless of what they look like. So we're asking people to be honest, and we'll give about a minute to people on the screen. But we ask people to rate yourself. Do you not see color? Or you say, I see color in people, but I celebrate each race, ethnicity, culture, and religion. Or I'm secretly a little racist, but I'd never say anything openly, which I think applies to maybe more people than they'd admit. I'm occasionally racist or use racist words, but I don't mean it in a bad way. Or I am racist, I admit it. I'm not proud of it, but I am. Or I'm a racist. I don't care what other people think, because let's face it, I'm superior. So we're going to leave that poll up for about another 10 or 20 seconds, and we're going to ask people to actually vote on that. And Pierre, as soon as they've done that, we're going to just come and look at some of the results. Because my sense is the way people perceive themselves and the way maybe other people perceive them may be completely different. So with that, I'm going to end the poll now, and I'm going to share the results on the screen now. So about 8% of people say they don't see color at all. 62% of people say they see color, but they celebrate each race, ethnicity, culture, and religion. 12% of people say they're secretly a little racist. 15% say they're occasionally racist, but they don't mean it in a bad way. 3% say they're racist, they admit it, and no one says, I'm racist, I don't care about the fact that I'm racist. Is that reflective? Do people perceive themselves in the way that others would perceive them? Do you think those results are reflective?
Are you asking that question of me, Howard?
Yes, please. Yeah.
Yes. You know, I think I'm guessing that the people who tuned in to this webinar this evening might be more inclined to be on the road of doing the work. In my experience of the work I've done, quite a lot of people would say, I don't see color, I'm colorblind. But I think that even when people say, I do see color and I celebrate the differences, I think that what we have to acknowledge is that those differences do come with different histories of harm, and some of the differences come with different power. So, you know, so that I can say I see someone who's different from me, maybe a gay person, for example. Part of seeing their queerness or their gayness is also about acknowledging that they might have had a different life history from me, a history of hurt. And I think seeing that difference is also about acknowledging what the meaning of that difference is. And I think that's often where what white privilege is about, is that we can say, you know, my whiteness hasn't brought any particular harm to me. And I think seeing difference is also not only seeing that difference at its face value, but seeing what that difference has meant for that person's life story. I think that's very important part of the story. But what is also encouraging to me, Howard and Jade, is that there were people in this poll who could say, I'm a little bit racist. I think that's very encouraging, because I think you can't change something that you can't acknowledge. And I think that's a lot of the work we have to do with white people, is for us to be able to say, yes, I have racism in me, and it's something that I'm working on. Unconscious bias is called that because it's unconscious. It's not in our awareness, and we need to find opportunities where it can come to our awareness. And only then can we really start to see change, I believe.
Pierre, I know we said we wouldn't keep you for long, but if you don't mind, there's just one or two questions that have come in from the audience we'd love to pose to you. So one person says, when kids are brought up in a racist home, what is the possibility of these kids being able to unlearn their racist makeup?
You know, I'm an optimist. I believe that there are multiple opportunities for us to get new perspectives. And you might find, for example, a young person goes to a new school, or they start to university, and they get exposed to new ideas. And I've worked I can remember in one of my school workshops, people saying, young people saying, my parents are racist. This was from a white person. My parents are racist. I don't know what to do with them. You can imagine that a teenager looking exasperated at their racist parents. And that says to me, that's encouraging, because that young person was already on a different journey from their parents. And there was another story which was very moving for me, which was a young black kid saying that his grandmother said to him, I struggle with the idea of you having white friends, because the experience I had as an older person in the apartheid system has made me suspicious of and uncomfortable around white people. And so those two stories, I think, are different parts of the spectrum of how we are shaped by, and maybe different from, our parents' or grandparents' generation. But young people are getting it. If we give them the opportunities to have the conversation and help them overcome their defensiveness, they are open, I think, to these more progressive ideas.
Jade, before we let Professor Brouard go, do you have a last question for him?
No, I think you've summed it up amazingly well, Pierre. And I think that it's all about the unconscious bias. It's a lot about accepting white privilege, and there's so much work done around that everybody can read. And thank you so much for being a part of this really important discussion.
Pierre, thank you. You are welcome to stay with us. You're welcome to leave, and thank you for giving up your evening to join us. Really greatly appreciate it.
Thanks a lot. Okay.
Fantastic. Jade, you're going to bring up the next members of the panel. Tell us who we're talking to now.
Great. Thanks, Howie. We've got Jelani Memory and Kevin Carroll and Vera Sharber joining us on this next segment. I can see that.
And Cheryl Cohen.
And Cheryl Cohen as well in the segment. Where's Cheryl's video on? I think so. Okay. So firstly, welcome to Jelani and Kevin. Good morning there in Portland, Oregon. Jelani is the author of a kid's book about racism, which is the book that I downloaded and spoke to Maya about. But even more than that, he's actually the founder of a kid's book about. And there are such fantastic books on this website When I was scrolling through it, there's a book, kid's book about anxiety, a kid's book about depression, a kid's book about divorce, a kid's book about adventure, about creativity, about money, just amazing topics that kids can engage. And Jelani, I can't wait to hear your journey because I know that you have a really interesting one on how you started. Yes, there it is. Thank you, Dan, on how you started this company. Kevin is also another author. I don't know if Kevin's video is on. Kevin is also an author of a kid's book about belonging, also part of the series, and also the author of 4 other successful books as well. I love when you read about him. He calls himself the instigator of inspiration and the creative catalyst. Kevin, belonging is such an important topic that we're going to discuss tonight that fits in tonight. So I'm excited to hear from you as well. And thank you both for joining us. We've got Vera Sharba, and Vera is actually a mechanical engineer, and she started a company called Green Design, which looks at smart buildings and to combat climate change. She was recently selected to be on the list of Forbes 30 under 30 Africa, so that's a remarkable achievement. So when she is not saving the planet or the climate, combating climate change or posting on the cover of Forbes magazine, she is studying race. She's doing her master's in race, and I was intrigued by this story, and I invited Vera onto the panel to talk to us about it. And of course, Cheryl Cohen, a renowned child psychologist. So important to get Cheryl's information here just on exactly what we were talking about. What is the right age? How do you approach your kids when you talk about racism? And very importantly, what are the right and the wrong things to say to make sure that they are on the proper journey of understanding it? So thank you so much. Jelani, let's kick off with you. Please tell everybody a little bit about your story and your journey of how you started a kid's book about, and particularly why you wrote the book about racism.
Yeah, the company for me, a kid's book about, started as a way to keep the conversation going about racism with my own kids. I have 6 children. 4 of them are white, 2 of them are brown. It's a mixed family, blended family. And it was a conversation that we were already having. And that conversation looked a little different between my brown kids and my white kids, but I wanted to make sure we kept it going. So as a personal project, totally outside of work, I wrote a kid's book about racism. And my kids thought it was cool, but when I showed it to other parents and adults, they had this remarkable response to it. And I sort of knew that I should do something more than just have the book be for my kids. And so that led to the forming of a kid's book about as a publishing company. And, now we've sold, almost north of 100,000 books and helped families all over the world truly start the most important conversations they have. And specifically right now, not just in America, but all over the world around racism. And it's been a privilege for me. I'm not an expert. I'm a dad, I'm a Black dad, and I'm an entrepreneur. And so it comes from a very personal place for me, this business, and specifically this book and this topic.
Great, thank you. Kevin, let's move on to you for a minute and talk about belonging. Why is belonging such an important topic for you, and more importantly, when you were growing up as well?
So first, thanks for having me. I do have to acknowledge Pierre. I really enjoyed his remarks, and I'm an optimist at heart, and I'm also 60-something too. So we share those 2 things. I just wanted to make sure I gave him a proper shout out because I really enjoyed what he was sharing. Belonging is a fundamental need for all of us. I mean, we want to feel a part of something, and that's our human nature. It's an innate thing that we're always striving for. And for me, it was very personal because of my childhood, not having my parents. Both of them were addicts, and they made decision to abandon their children. My grandparents rescued us, and I had to find a way to belong because I didn't have a formal familial kind of setting. And so I discovered places to belong, and I had the playground and sports. I had the public library. That was another place. My best friend's house was the other place where his mother became my most important person in my life, my CEO, my chief encouragement officer of my dreams, Miss Lane. And I really found these really important places to belong. And school was a big place for me. and I loved learning, and teachers recognized that I had an intellect, and so I got celebrated. And so the more that I started to realize the importance of belonging, I've just always been naturally seeking ways to build community and connect. And so it's been my lifelong pursuit to build community, to build connections, to be a bridge builder. And I'm happy to say that I'm not done with that work. And I'm glad that I have a chance to encourage people to do that same thing through the book, with a kid's book about belonging.
Thanks, Kevin. Yes, and I think belonging has such an important place to play in the racism discussion now, and how it's important to love ourselves first, which you mentioned in your book as well. We need to feel like we belong before we can also help other kids feel like they belong. Jelani, just to come back to you for a minute, what are some of the actual tools that you can give to parents to help kids approach this discussion about racism? What did you do with your own kids when you, as you call it, you were a blended family?
Yeah, my best piece of advice, and look, this is free advice. You don't even need to buy the book to get this advice. And I tell it to everyone I chat with, and it'll be annoyingly simple, is just decide that you are going to talk with your kids about racism. Just go for it and do it. I can promise you will not get everything right. You won't cover everything. You won't get it all in one conversation. But I think the acknowledgement for parents, for educators, to realize that the likelihood that the biggest barrier between them and the kids around them learning and talking about racism is actually themselves. And so being able to muster up the courage and the willingness to just dive into the conversation and not have to get it right. And also to know that it's just the first, hopefully, of many conversations. And if that means you're a white parent just wading in, not with the right words, that's okay. Be on that journey with your kid to learn alongside of them, to find more resources, to read books. And like somebody just commented, plant that seed. I think that has to start somewhere, but don't wait. Don't wait until you are, graduate level and being able to talk about racism before you introduce your kids, because by the time you get there, it'll be too late. And so what I found with my book is it becomes the excuse to start the conversation. It starts at the basic place to go, here's a definition of racism, and here's the fact that it exists. And then after that, what adults find is that their kids already have a lot of thoughts about this, that they've already been curious and creative and thoughtful about what it means to have different skin color and ways that might have actually already played out in their own lives. And I think that conversation can actually start quite early. So my best tip is just to decide to have that conversation and dive in, and then try and find tools along the way that help you do that.
Jelani, may I ask, you said dive in. Give us the first minute of how you start that conversation.
Sure. So I would ask a kid in your life, and again, they can be 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. You can ask them, have you ever heard the word racism? And it's likely a kid is either going to say yes or no, right? So you got a 50-50 shot. And if they have heard of it, you can ask them another question. What do you think that word means? And then it sort of leads to more and more questions, and let the kid lead in this process to try and figure out where they're at, so that you know who you're sort of speaking into. And I think to address maybe a concern at that point in the conversation, or folks maybe not wanting to do that, is I think this inherent fear that somehow we will sully our kids or get them on the wrong track, or somehow teach them to be racist if we teach them about racism. And I just want to remove that fear if I can, and go, you're not going to injure or hurt or derail your kid's development if you bring up racism when they are a 5-year-old. I can just promise you, you're not going to do that. Be appropriate, pay attention to their developmental level, but don't be afraid of somehow breaking their innocence. Because we teach our kids not to hit, not to lie, to be nice, to share. Why not teach them about this very other fundamental thing? And if the answer from your kid is, no, I've never heard about that, what is that? Try and wade in with your best answer. I can't speak for every parent and where they're at, but hopefully it sparks a conversation that keeps going. And my intuition is that kids already naturally bring this up. They might not use the word racism, but they will notice difference in skin color. They will notice difference in culture. They will notice that certain groups of people live in a certain part of town and not others. They will notice when a new kid joins their classroom, capture those moments as teaching moments to start that conversation about racism. And I think those happen organically at 4, 5, and 6 years old quite easily.
Thanks, Jelani. And I completely agree with what you're saying. And I think one of the important things with my daughter and with all kids actually is just that curiosity that she asked, but why, mommy? And I think kids ask that a lot. And even that small little question unpacks an entire conversation. They want to know why this is happening. Vera, just to move on to you, please welcome to the panel, and please just let us know from smart buildings and covers of Forbes magazines why your master's in race.
Okay, awesome. Hi everyone, and thank you, Jade, for having this discussion. I think it's so important. And I kind of, maybe I also want to preface it a bit because I love what Pierre said. And what I would say is to start off with, as a Black person, I'm not speaking on behalf of every Black person in this country, because even the belief that that's the case is actually racial microaggression. Every Black person has got different spectrums of privilege. And for instance, for myself, I speak from the perspective of class privilege. And there was a question that was asked earlier about privilege. And a lot of the times people say privilege and people get angry. But I think that if we look at privilege as the power that exists simply because of the power structures that are there, then you start to see that privilege is actually a sense of power. And using our privilege, we need to be able to do whatever it takes to get equality along the different identity markers that exist. So there's gender privilege, there's class privilege, there's able-bodied privilege, there's sexual orientation privilege, there's race privilege, all of these different privileges that exist. And that just shows the different power structures and what identity markers get more power than others. And so when you have privilege, it's power with responsibility. And so you shouldn't be ashamed. So when people have white privilege and then they say, oh, you know, why do you keep saying that? And then they kind of get offended around it. But actually, it's just to say you've got power with responsibility. What are you doing with your privilege to pull other people to be at the same equality level within the power systemic injustice that exists? So the reason why I ended up doing my master's in racial justice is because of intersectional environmentalism, which basically says that you cannot have climate justice if you do not have racial justice. Because a lot of people are fighting, you know, for the endangered species and they're fighting for the planet, but you're not fighting for people who are marginalized. And that to me doesn't make sense because sustainability is social, economic, and environmental. And so what I wanted to do specifically as a Black African woman, where my 3 identity markers all are marginalized, Black, African, and female, what I wanted to do is I wanted to better understand how I can kind of get a sense of the idea of racism and the idea of all of these different isms that exist so that I can get a better understanding of people in general. Because as an engineer, I just know about engineering, but to get a better understanding of people, because if I want to make the world better for generations to come, I need to understand people. And when you look at things like racism, that's actually a social risk. And if we're not willing as South Africans to address racism, then we're just going to end up kind of like, we can save all the planet as much as we want. But at the end of the day, if we're not willing to take people along on the journey and we're not willing to really face racism within our country, then it's going to be a challenge. And maybe just to add the last thing, just in terms of what you said, because sorry, I've been sitting here quietly and I had so many thoughts as people were coming up with things. So I'm just pulling at all my thoughts. What I just wanted to also say is that there was a comment which came into the chat, and I agree with that. A lot of people say that people who were born after 1994, which I'm not, I was born before 1994, that we're born free. And I think that that as well is racial microaggression, because what it does is that it denies the fact that the so-called born free generation, our parents were in apartheid. When I was born, Nelson Mandela was not free. So a lot of the times that negates the fact that we still, I think that I would almost even say that we can probably assume that people are racist, and then you do the work to get yourself out of racism. Because there was literally a constitutional law that almost dehumanized Black people. Not even almost, that dehumanized Black people in our country. And so it was so systemically entrenched that I would almost be surprised if someone isn't racist. So you almost have to do the work to get yourself out of it, or even do the little checklist in a sense to get a sense of, do you have racial microaggressions? There's a lot of talk about farm murders. That's an assumption of criminality with Black people. That's a racial microaggression. Those who talk about reverse racism, that doesn't actually exist because racism is about power and prejudice. So if you don't have the power, and that's not governmental power, if you don't have the power in terms of the power structures that exist systemically, then you can't actually be racist, because you need to have both power and prejudice. And so there are all these different things to kind of be like, have you done the work? And then you'll be able to say, no, I'm not racist. So almost assume you're racist, do the work, and then you can say, okay, I'm not racist. That's just kind of, why I decided to do racial justice, because you can't have climate justice without racial justice.
That's very interesting. Thank you so much. Cheryl, to move on to you. Are you on, I'm actually very excited to hear this discussion, because I would love to know from a professional, when is too soon? When is it okay to talk about your kids? Where are there appropriate ways that you can talk about it so that it's less traumatic? Please enlighten us on how kids think about this subject.
Absolutely. I think I'd like to share with you a story about when I, as a professional, came in contact with, or was faced really directly in my therapy room about race issues. And that was when I had a client who was looking for the right color to draw a person. And it was very interesting because the flesh that was provided in the Crayola box wasn't the flesh that she wanted to depict her color in the picture. And at that point, I realized how we're not even aware sometimes of what we are given in our social and our general environment, educational environment, and how, and even in terms of what Pierre said about language, of how we develop an identity and a sense of self. I'd like to, so I thought that was quite an interesting a point at which to share with you. Moving to your question, I would love to share with you a developmental perspective on how children process difference and diversity in order to develop perhaps a non-racial stance or an anti-racist stance in their more adult or teenage life. Children are born with the capacity to see difference, and this is absolutely normal. In fact, it's desirable. I believe that not talking to children about difference, about diversity, and about race is as tricky for parents as talking to them about it. So as the other panelists have said, and I'm certainly just adding to it, is that we need to talk to our children about it. So how do we do that? And how does it develop? So as I said, children do see difference and sameness. They like to categorize things, but they see it, they don't necessarily judge it. Okay, so they see people with long hair, with short hair, with glasses, with green eyes, with brown eyes. They see all the diversity. Often what we do with that information will shape their perspectives on things. Now, our job as parents and as adults or educators is to be able to help our children to develop an integrated sense of self. What happens is what children do, according to many developmental theorists, is that when they're very little, they split things into good and bad. So when mommy, for example, or dad brings a bottle or a breast full of milk, then mommy or daddy is a wonderful fairy prince or fairy princess, and they want that they're the best in the world. And when mommy or daddy doesn't do that, then they're a wicked witch, and they tend to split that into something bad. And perhaps that's why fairy tales are so popular for young children, because it plays on the developmental psyche of the child who splits things into good and bad. However, while children do this, it's not something that they need to stick with. It's actually got a name that's been called by Melanie Klein a paranoid schizoid position, because it's very split in terms of good and bad. As children grow and develop, and I'm talking about children from as young as 2 or maybe even 18 months, they begin to see an integration through experience of good and bad. That when mommy brings the bottle, she's the same fairy princess as the wicked witch that didn't bring it 5 minutes ago. And so we see that children learn through their attachments that people can be both good and bad, do the things that they want and things that they don't like. And we aim to help our children to develop that integrated sense of other, and thereby develop an integrated sense of self. And when children can do that, I believe they are building a good model for growing up outside of racist definitions or outside of a racist perspective. And the reason I really feel that this is something we have to talk about to our children from as early as possible, as early as we talk to them about who's the same and who's different, who's tall, who's short, who's a boy, who's a girl. Children notice these things. We cannot assume that and raise children who are colorblind, because it doesn't work like that. Children do notice difference, and if we don't talk to them about it, they will perhaps absorb other perspectives, and those are not necessarily the ones that we want our children to grow and to develop. Just moving on to the splitting defense mechanism, what we see when people don't move towards integration, when they stick with a splitting defense mechanism, then we see that colludes with a racist perspective of others. So when they divide the world into us and them, me and you, and that's not how we want to raise our children. We want them to be able to see that sometimes I make mistakes, sometimes I don't. Sometimes I do things well, sometimes I don't. Sometimes mommy does, sometimes we want an integrated sense of self. We want an integrated sense of others, whatever color a person might be. So I hope that gives a little bit of perspective.
Thank you. And I'm glad to hear that the younger the better. So thank you, Cheryl.
And also just to say is that I think Kevin and Jelani have done such a beautiful job of using bibliotherapy. That's what it's really called, to talk about these complex issues. And that book is a lovely way to do it, because it gives us kind of distance. It's not talking about me, and it's not talking about you. It's talking about the story, and then we can explore and see what children already know. There's an interesting story that I have, that I'd like to share with you, is once I asked one of my own children, we went to see Shrek when it first came out, and I wanted to know if they noticed color, and I said, did you notice what color Shrek is? And they actually said, yeah, of course they had. I mean, why wouldn't they? And that was also just an opportunity to enter into the discussion about race.
Okay, great. Thank you. Kevin, I'm going to come for my last question, just come back to you for a minute there. What are some of the ways that we can teach kids about belonging? What are some of the words we can use? What are some examples that we can give them? And how do we deal with the kids that don't feel like they belong?
So first, I got to just say, the language being used, I'm a lover of words. Oh my gosh, you guys, Vera, Pierre, Cheryl, just the language. That's why I was writing on my phone notes, just listening to the words you're using. They're so rich and important. And I think we just need to always be thinking about the language we're using. It just really matters. Words matter. And so I so appreciate how you all were sharing such really beautiful insights, but the clarity in the word choice really was fantastic. So I was reveling at, so I apologize for my head being down, but I was actually typing notes into my phone. I think, belonging really is about, and I say in the book, first, you have to understand who you are at your core as a human being. And so when your parents are allowing you to explore and sample different things to discover who you are is really important. And I think discovery is a really important word, and sampling, right? And letting parents, your loved ones, the adults in your life that find time for you to just try things and explore things and to spend time in that discovery, that exploration. And I know Cheryl will appreciate that, because play is something that I build my foundation of a lot of my conversations and my work around. And so play is really critical to me. So whatever that play, what form that might take, I think is really important. So how are you finding ways to play and be playful with the child, so they're finding and discovering things? Someone mentioned this fantastic word, curiosity, feeding that curiosity and supporting that curiosity. That's how you start to discover who you are at your core, and you start to create these insights, these beliefs about yourself and what brings you joy. I always look at, what are those things that tickle your brain? What are those things that bring you joy, are also part of discovering who you are. And I keep going back to, you have to belong to yourself first before you can belong anywhere else. And that allows you to be okay being alone. And one of the things that was mentioned was, the challenges that they say this is the most stressed and anxious generation coming up, Gen Z. And I think we have to find ways to be comfortable in our own skin and in our own presence. I think it's really important. And, one of the things that I've discovered in all of my time is making time to connect with young kids. So in my neighborhood, I've given myself this moniker, I'm the old man best friend. And so I know all the kids in our neighborhood, and I say hello to them. I, intentionally have conversations with them and speak to them at their level and meet them where they are. So I've gotten to know a lot of young people in our neighborhood, and we've lived in our neighborhood now for 13 years. So I've actually watched children grow from infants where their parents brought them home to now they're preteens. And I've got just wonderful friends. I like to say, as my wife says, your little friends come by the house, but they knock on the door and ask for me. So we have conversations all the time. And I think what has happened is they realize they can belong to someone and connect with someone that might not necessarily look like them or be the same age as them, but like, oh, I like him. He has nice energy. I like that he talks to me. And to hear the parents remark to me when their children aren't around, we so appreciate you taking time to have a conversation with our son or our daughter. That really matters to them, that it's beyond just the family, that someone else recognizes them as a person, that they are being seen outside of the family. And I think that's so important to getting to that place of feeling like you belong, like you have a connection somewhere, is we want to be seen. We want to be recognized. We want to be spoken to. And I think that's really what I actively practice, and I would encourage others to do the same.
Thank you. Howie, do you have any questions left for the panel? Thank you, Kevin.
Yeah, I certainly do. And Kevin, I want to know, when you define how you belong, do you belong to one tribe or do you belong to many tribes? Is there something, do you identify as a black tribe, a cool tribe? Are there many forms of identification that make up a composite human being?
I think we're very complex that way, and we will belong to lots of different tribes. I think it's a matter of your personal interests, points of view, the things that you're pursuing. I'm a member of many different tribes, and I know that. And so I'm a shapeshifter, if you will, right? I find ways to navigate the worlds that I want to be in, but these are all things that matter to me. So I'm not chasing belonging, right? I know that these are people that I share interest in, and so I want to be a part of that tribe. But I'm not pursuing, oh, if I get in that, that's going to unlock this for me. It's never been that way. And so I think absolutely you're going to be a member of lots of different tribes, but the foundational piece of that is going to be your values and what your interests are.
So I want to use that for Cheryl Cohn, because we as a Jewish community in South Africa have been very successful in creating a strong sense of belonging amongst our kids. They feel very strongly Jewish. They feel very strongly part of a community. But when it comes to the Jewish day schools that they go to, they see only white kids because by some trick of fate, it just so happened that almost all of the Jewish kids in South Africa, or Jews in South Africa, just so happened to be white, as I suppose the Ethiopian Jews all just so happened to be black. But because we're almost monoracial as Jews in South Africa, our kids are not exposed to people across the color line at all. In fact, the only black people they generally know growing up is a domestic worker in their home. And they don't therefore come to see black people as equal, as superior, as friends, because we've put them into a system, and a Jewish day school educational system, which is solely white.
So I think that, Howard, what you're talking about, what Kevin's talking about, is so important in terms of belonging and identity. How do we see that in terms of our South African context? And I'd like to say that I think it's very important for children to develop an identity and a sense of self. This is part of the process of belonging, actually. And before children can have a self-esteem, they have to know who I am and who I am not. So there is going to be a need to define where the boundaries lie in terms of identity. However, that points to difference. It doesn't point to discrimination, which means, and that's the point I'd like to really also share and come back to what you're saying in a minute, is that we don't often, people or we, try to use discrimination as a way of saying, I'm okay, you're not okay. You'll notice how people respond to others who've been diagnosed with COVID. They might say things like, well, she doesn't wear a mask, or he's been out and about too much, etc. There's a need to blame and shame as a way of coping with one's own difficult feelings. So that is the splitting defense mechanism that I'm talking about, where we have to split into good and bad in order to allow oneself to deal with one's own difficult feelings. And that's what we don't want our children to be doing. And this is something that can happen whether you're in a homogenous society or school environment or not. I do believe, and I think that our social expectations are, that children do need to be exposed to a diverse group of people. But what do we do if they're not? And here's where books come into play, I feel, or movies or series, etc. Whatever they might be, there's one on Michelle Obama, recent one on Netflix, etc. But to encourage our children to read books by African authors, to read books by Indian authors, to read books about where the protagonist comes from different class structures. So if we can expose our children so that they can get a sense of what does it feel like to be the other, that's what we'll be doing. We'll be doing a great service for them if we can get them to be able to see what it feels like. In fact, all the anti-bullying programs that I've ever been involved in, and I was the educational director of an organization called Kids Safe SA in the past, we focused on getting children to know what it feels like. In other words, if we can get them to know, to use their hearts and their emotions as a compass of how to deal with others in different situations, then we get them to connect to the experience and to be open to understanding, to respect, to compassion, and to connection.
Thanks. Vera, I'm going to ask you a very unfair question. I presume you have white friends and colored friends and Indian friends. For the Americans busy watching us, the term colored in South Africa is not a pejorative term at all. It's but if you could tell them honestly 3 things that you wish they would change in the way they related to you or related to each other or related to the world around them, what would you actually tell them?
Okay. Thank you for that question. Sure, you really did put me on the spot there. What I did want to just say, just with the school thing, is another way to really get children to interact could be through sports clubs, which aren't necessarily school specific. Because I think the danger, if they only interact with domestic workers or with people who are in a different class or a lower class, is that that's going to be their assumption as they grow older, is that Black people are poor or Black people are workers, or, you know, they're going to end up growing with that assumption. So I think it might be worth maybe exploring things like sports clubs where they can just hang out with kids of different races. Three things that I would tell my white friends. I have white friends, I have colored friends, I've got Asian friends in terms of Indian, Asian, Chinese, Asian, but a very diverse group because I went to a private school in high school. I think the first thing that I would say is that they can't be colorblind. It's so dangerous. I think we've said it across the whole board here. It's so dangerous to be colorblind because what that means is that you might end up sitting in a boardroom and everyone around you is white, but you're colorblind. So you don't realize that you don't actually have diversity inside that room. And so I think it's very important to not be colorblind. The second thing I would tell them is that diversity does not mean inclusion. You can sit in a room of diverse group of people, but unless you're including them, which means that every person's voice is equally weighted, then actually that's just diversity. Diversity just means that you've got a whole group of people in the room, but inclusion means that everyone in the room's voice is equally important. Because I see a lot of people just use that word interchangeably. So I think it's about pull in the people who would normally not have a voice and pull them into the conversations, because that helps. And then the third thing I would say is that not all Black people are the same. Oh my gosh. So like in South Africa alone, we've got different tribes of Black people. And so not all Black people are Zulu, not all Black people are Xhosa, not all Black people, you know, talk loud, not all Black people can dance. I can't dance, but I am absolutely Black. Not all Black people, it's unfair to just put a brush across them. Also, not all Black people are criminals. Not all Black people are, you know, are not smart, or like, there's a lot of stereotypes around Black people. And I would say like some of the stereotypes can even range to things like our hair, and, you know, like there's so many things, there's so many stereotypes. And I think I would say get to know someone for who they are, and also understand their context and their story, and don't make an assumption that all Black people are, because that's where we end up starting to live in our little silos because of stereotypes that exist. So yeah. Okay, well, there's a comment that came there as well. So I think that's the same thing. That's essentially what I would say, is get to know people for who they are. And that's as much as I can say. I know there's so much more. So I hope I did that question justice to all the Black people who are in the group. But yeah, I hope I did that question justice.
So we're going to end this section with Jelani. If you could turn on your camera so we could have one last question with you. You told us about your incredibly diverse family that you have. Tell us how they get on, and is race ever an issue amongst the kids themselves? Now that you've braced the subject, is this a once-off thing, or is this an ongoing conversation? Or do they, as Vera say, just see each other for the humans they actually are?
Yeah, you know, my kids, they're from 1 to 16, so a pretty widespread. And race and racism is a continual conversation in our home. It really, truly is. And that both is by things that happen inside our home, things that happen in school, and of course out there in the world. And as our kids learn more stories and read more news things and see things on TV. And so we keep it as an ongoing discussion. And that means sometimes my white teenagers say, hey, is this racist? And we'll have that conversation, and I'm glad we have it, because otherwise they would feel too afraid or unsure or not know how to have those conversations or talk about those things. And then, you know, for me, it's really important that my kids understand the differences and their experiences because of their skin color. And so for my white kids, that means understanding that their brown younger siblings are going to have fundamentally different experiences, and they've already witnessed a handful of those. And how to stand up for them and understand what their experience is, and to be an ally and a good older sibling, if you will. And for my two young brown kids, and I'm using black and brown interchangeably here, I want them to be prepared for the world they're walking into. And so again, that conversation is ongoing, and that meant, you know, an honest conversation about what happened to George Floyd and his murder with all of my kids. in different ways, obviously with each of them, but a really honest conversation, and we keep it going. And I don't want our family to be an outlier. I don't want it to be because I wrote a book on racism and I have this amazing blended family that we're somehow unique in that way. I hope all families are having conversations like this. And if I can just stress so much, I'm not an expert in this. I have a lot of lived experience, and so that makes me a little more qualified maybe, but I encourage every parent to not shy away from it because they feel uneducated or unskilled or don't know exactly the right thing to say, because my family should just be the normal.
Jelani, you asked the question of, in fact, whether people are having these conversations. So we actually have a poll on that subject, and we're going to pull it up right now. And we actually do want to ask people, are you having these conversations at the moment with your kids, yes or no? Or are you talking about a little? Are you talking about a lot? Certainly, if you turn on CNN, it seems to be one of the major issues that we have. So we're just going to give people approximately a minute just to vote. And the question is, have you had a discussion with your kids about race, racism, and privilege since George Floyd incident in the USA? And we'll just give people a minute or so to vote on that. Vera, if you were to predict the results coming out of this, what would you say?
Oh my gosh, I would definitely say it depends on the kids' exposure to social media, but I do think that race has come up across the board. I mean, my high school, they just today had a protest. When I was in high school, I would never have thought about doing that because I had no idea that there was so much racial microaggression. So I do think kids now are starting to speak about racism, and I think it's good and important.
So in fact, we're going to share the results with everyone. So about 43% of people say they are having these discussions with their kids. 17% say a little, not very much. About 17% say no. And about 22% of people watching don't have kids to have these discussions with. But certainly that seems to indicate not enough people actually talking about the important issues of the day. And if we've done anything productive tonight, we've probably helped people start and encourage people to start those discussions. So I want to end this segment with just telling you a story that Bill Clinton told. It was at Shimon Peres's 90th birthday party in Jerusalem, and Bill Clinton spoke, and he said, all of human history is defined by one definition, the definition between us and them. And our job in life is really to expand the definition of us and reduce the definition of them. And I thought it was such a beautiful way of describing the world. So I want to thank you all for joining us. Those who've joined us from Johannesburg, those who've joined us from the United States. It's been such a privilege to listen to all of you. Thank you so much for being on the panel this evening. And we are now joined by Amy Polina. Amy, so nice to see you. We're going to spotlight you. You've got an amazing project that you're actually running at the moment that we wanted to highlight because kids are going back to school at the moment.
So that's where we come in. Not all schools are going back at the moment. A lot of private schools and a lot of privileged schools are going back at the moment, but most schools in South Africa and around us are not going back. And that's why I'm speaking tonight, to continue our plea for education packs. So I do want to thank you for this opportunity for me to talk about our packs and our initiative, and hopefully we can get more help. My friend Yael Siegel and I came up with this idea at the beginning of lockdown when we saw that it was just so easy to continue educating our children. We could log on anywhere, we could go collect packs from school, or teachers would drop at us. And this right that we were always told we were given, we saw that was actually a privilege. And that's where we came up with the idea of Back a Pupil. We decided together that we would ask the community to help us make education packs. So we asked people to put together worksheets and age-related material, as well as to put in the pack plain books that children could write in, stationery, We've recently added a mask, a reading book, and some people even add a little sweet treat to their pack. And these are distributed to the community through 2 charities that we've chosen. We've chosen Feed SA that help us distribute, as well as Union of Jewish Women. And it has been so amazingly received. Community members, individuals, schools, companies have even donated stuff. I've had people sit in my garage and help pack packs. I've had good friends sit in my garage. I've had amazing high school students get on board, and it's just been unbelievable. As I said, because of these rising numbers, we are continuing and we do need the help. And if anyone is able to help, however possible, this would be amazing.
So tell us how we can help you.
So there are many ways to help. A big thing why Yael and I did this was that we were just tired of the usual message of EFT this, wire money here, and that to us wasn't helping anything. We wanted to physically do something, obviously within the rules of lockdown. So for us, what we did and what many parents and teachers can do is when you're printing your children's worksheets, print an extra set, put that in an envelope. You can make up packs. A big thing like we said, and what I said was, we saw what privilege is. And I think a big thing with children is showing your children what privilege is. And a big thing is I've sat with my kids and they've helped make up the packs. And I think that's how they learn what privilege is. So I think for the individual, the person at home, they could make up a pack. Like I said, what was in it, the worksheets, the stationery, the books, a mask, anything like that. For someone that it's easier to transfer because we do need money, you can transfer packs and we can print worksheets for you and buy the stationery, whatever's needed.
And where you distributing these to? I know Ricky Lyons and I run the CAN in Melrose North, and we support the Kliptown community. And we understand that the King David School Foundation, I think together with you, delivered a whole lot of educational packs into Kliptown.
Yes, that's correct. So as I said, we've teamed up with Feed SA as well as Union of Jewish Women because we felt that that would be distributed all over. So Feed SA have gone to everywhere, to Alexander, to Soweto, all over, Hillbrow, the same as Union of Jewish Women. They're quite connected to Kliptown. So the SAJR they made the most beautiful packs and we distributed there. So it's really been everywhere, not even through these charities. We've had a lot of individuals that their nannies have gone home to their areas and they've taken a whole lot of packs and distributed there. And to date, we've distributed over 5,000 packs. So it's been really amazing. But as I said, sadly, there's a huge, huge need for this to continue.
So, Amy, we've put on the chat section, we've put on ways that people could donate to you. We've put on the Union of Jewish Women bank account details. And of course, the Union of Jewish Women is a registered NPO, so you can get a Section 18A tax deduction for any donation that we make through to your project as well. Also on the chat, maybe you can give us an email address on the chat, and people who are able to help, whether they have printing businesses or distribution businesses or textbook businesses, maybe they can be in touch with you to see how they can help as well. But every single one of us are able to either make a donation or make a pack or do something to help those kids who are trying to learn during this incredibly difficult period. So Amy, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it, and congratulations on the amazing, amazing work that you're doing.
Thank you so much.
Fantastic. Jade, isn't that a remarkable thing we've seen?
Unbelievable so far and so insightful. Aim, keep up the amazing work. It's just so important at the moment that we all come together, and Vera and Kevin and Jelani and Cheryl, just so much insights to take home. And I'm looking forward to the next section as well.
So I mentioned a little earlier on that one of our panelists coming up now, Lulu, in fact, recorded something for June the 16th. And as we bring the panelists on to our next section, we would love just to show people a little short video of a tribute that Lulu Potenza did on June the 16th. So Dan, if I could ask you to bring that up and share that with our audience, I'd appreciate it.
On the 16th of June 1976, thousands and thousands of students marched for their educational rights, rights that we reap the benefits of today. They were brave and they were strong, and they never turned away from the challenge at hand. Now, granted, we are in 2020 and a lot has changed from then, but not enough yet. We live in a society that is unsafe for women to live in. We live in a society that is so impoverished it is shocking. It is our time as the youth to stand up to so many issues. Stand up to male domination. Stand up to violence against women and children. Stand up to hate crimes committed to the LGBTQIA community. And stand up against racism. We can't be waiting around for African Americans to spark something in us. We experience racism and police brutality here as well. As the youth of South Africa, with the powerful background of our brothers and sisters of 76, it is our time to rise up, stand up, and show up for our people just like they did.
Thank you so much. And we'd like to bring onto the panel, we would like to bring on Louis Willemse, if you'll turn on your camera now, Leal Bethlehem, Lulu Potenza, if we could ask you all to please join us on the panel.
God, Mom.
Start my video.
Start.
Louis, welcome. Nice to meet you.
It started.
It has started. We can hear you guys. Louis, can you unmute yourself? We can. Hi,
okay,
Louis.
I think I've unmuted myself.
You've unmuted yourself. Welcome to the panel. Fantastic to meet you. You have an interesting story. You are called Louis Willemse. You're of a darker skin color to most other Jews that we see in Johannesburg. Tell us a little about yourself.
Well, what can I say? Actually, thank you very much for inviting me to the panel today. I'm just a guy who come from Rustenburg, from my royal family on both my mother's side and my father's side. I've read a lot. I know a lot about history, so I was very excited to be invited to this, but I thought I will be talking more about racism, but based on history. Where does it come from? How did it come? And people must always know that racism is not only based on the color white and black. If we go back to the time of the Scythians, go back to the time of the Byzantines, we'll realize that the people who were marginalized more than any other people were the Tatars in the steppes in Georgia. So I'll just give a little bit history about them. If you remember, there was a declaration that was made in 652 by the Arabs, the so-called Arabs, because for me, Arab is not a nation. It's just a group of people. A declaration that 250 blacks must be shipped to Baghdad each and every year. And there were also people who were taken from Europe, and those people were the Tatars. Those people were taken to Baghdad. Actually, it was their head office before the Genghis Khan came. They were taken there, and the Tatars were made as security guards. They were part of their policing. And the black people were taken to the plantation, for the sugar plantation and the salt plantations. So there was a war which came, they call it the Battle of Basra, which happened. It took 15 years, and the slaves, which was the black people, together with the Tatars, who were also slaves, but they were privileged, more privileged. They come together and start a battle, which took 15 years. And I know a lot of people don't know any more about that. So that's how actually that thing of racism started, because it's not only black people who were taken as racist. You can see a lot of people, most of the Arab people who are staying in North Africa. Those were people who were Tatars, because when those people moved back into other slaves, moved back into Africa, they went back with their friends because they were part of the same thing. So that's briefly what I wanted to say.
So Lou, can I ask you, you converted to Judaism, is that correct?
Yes.
Tell us how our community has accepted you.
Firstly, a lot of people ask me that question, but the thing that I want to tell you is I didn't come to Judaism based on, okay, it's a white religion or whatever, because I remember when I told one of my friends, said, I'm going to convert now, actually, I'm busy in the process. Then he asked me, why do you join a white religion? I told him, for me, it's not about a white religion, it's I've got this craving. There's something in my heart that wants to be there. I want to be part of that. I don't know how to explain it, but later I'll explain how did it come later, how did I find out. So I had friends, I used to work for Liberty Life, so I had friends like Jonathan Fox. I had, before he became a rabbi, actually, I used to work with him. So I told him that this is what I want to do, so I don't know what to do. I've read a book. I started by reading a book by Rabbi Jungris, Committed Life. I read it 4 or 5 times. I gave it to my wife to read it. She enjoyed it. She liked it. I said, okay, fine. What I'm going to do, I'm going to send Rabbi Jungris a letter and tell him how did the book inspire me. So I sent her a letter. She came back to me. She told me that I've got the Jewish nashama. So I want you to go and contact this rabbi in South Africa. It's Rabbi Mofsen. I tried to contact Rabbi Mofsen, I didn't, but I went to Jonathan. He told me, go to Rabbi Handler. He's the person who will be able to help you because he's the person who's working with conversions. I phoned Rabbi Handler. He made an appointment. I went to see him. That was it. That's how we started. He didn't even push me back or did anything because I gave him a letter from Rabbi Jungris and said, this is what she's, every Friday she was sending me a letter and told me how am I doing, what's happening with me, have I contacted Rabbi Mofson already? I said, no, not yet, but I've contacted Rabbi Handler and this is what's happening. That's how we started, actually.
You know, that does remind me of a story. Quite recently, there was one of the Israelis involved in the rescue of Ethiopian Jewry came to South Africa. And he told the story of that when they arrived in Ethiopia and went to go see the Jewish community in Ethiopia wouldn't accept them because they didn't know they were white Jews.
Yeah.
And it came as quite a shock to them to discover that they were white Jews, as I suppose in many ways that the Jews of North Africa, the Swadim, didn't really associate and identify with the Jews of Eastern Europe, the Ashkenazim.
Yes.
So Lal, let's bring you in here. You have an interesting setup. You're a mother with little melanin in her, with a black daughter.
Two black daughters and a wife.
Two black daughters and a wife, and a mother who is one of the great icons of the Jewish community in South Africa, Marlene Bethlehem.
No, that's right. That's right. Howard, I come from a family that's very involved in the Jewish community. My mom has been deeply involved in all the structures of the Jewish community. My dad as well. I come from a very warm and wonderful community, and I feel very privileged to have been part of it. And Judaism is very important in my life. I am also very involved in a shul in Hillbrow, Temple Israel Hillbrow, which has probably about 40% Black members. And I think being in the progressive Jewish community, growing up in that community, was, a very big force in my life, and, has been a great blessing. And I definitely wanted to pass that on to our daughters. And both our daughters, Noluvo and Tembela, have had bat mitzvahs. They both read Hebrew very well. They've had a decent Jewish education. Having said that, we also are cognizant of the fact that our daughters are Black, and that being Jewish is not going to be their only identity in life. So, for example, we were quite clear about not sending them to a Jewish day school because they would only mix with white people and with one ethnic group, even if it is our ethnic group, and even if it is a precious community to us. So we were pretty clear about wanting them to have a diverse experience and about being serious about the fact that our children are Black, and they need to grow up in a way that affirms their Blackness and that makes us as white people sensitive to some of the issues that they're going through. And I can say that adopting Black children has a profound effect. And I have found that even though before we were married and before we adopted children, both Emilia and I were both very involved in political structures and in anti-apartheid struggles of various kinds. But I must say that to me, I can say looking back, that racism was still something somewhat abstract. When it is your own children that are affected by racism, then it becomes very personal, and you feel and you perceive that experience differently. So I think that I've learned very profound lessons from my children and through my children about what it feels like to experience racism. And it's made me see the experience that Black people have differently from how I did before.
So maybe, Lulu, we can turn to you and tell us about some of those experiences. How have you experienced it?
Yeah, and just with the preface, obviously, of like, I'm not speaking for all Black people. My story is very individual to myself. But just before I give an example, I just want to say that I think that very often people overcomplicate the idea of racism because it seems like such an abstract and like crazy and concept idea. But just bringing it back to someone's name, right, I think is a good place to start. Because my name is Noluvo, right? That is my name. But I go by Lulu. And although it started out as, you know, a cute nickname, it turned into a way for white people to dodge saying Noluvo because it was too hard to pronounce, or, you know, I can't say your name. And it turns into a whole conversation like that, which I personally have had multiple situations of. A teacher in a school, it was already term 2. We had this class multiple times a week. There were many Black girls in this class. And every time she had to say the register, there were Tehofatsos, there were Noluvos, there were Nomtandazos, there were Black names. And every single lesson of every single day, she butchered our names. And I think actually that is why I go by Lulu. And I've had to actually rethink my decisions as I've grown older, because I think I'm at a point now where it's like, I'm not changing my name because it's convenient. It's more convenient for you to say. And I think if I can say Sarah, and if I can say Rebecca, and if I can say Hannah, then you should be able to say Noluvo. So the idea of racism is actually not as complicated as people think. It's a very simple ideology that is in the back of people's heads. And like, if you yourself, just people watching, have domestic workers, do you call your domestic workers by their names? Because I can guarantee you that if your domestic's name is Sarah, that is not her African name. That is not the name that her mother gave her. So I think it's also important to have those conversations with the people you employ. And because obviously, well, okay, not obviously, but I would assume that you would have a close enough relationship to someone to the point where you are able to say, hi, what is your name? Do you know what I mean? Like, what is your name? Because they know your name. They know your name and they know your story, but very often you don't know theirs. And I think most of my racist encounters have been, I'm adopted. All of my family members are white. And I remember we were on holiday in a town in the Free State called Rosendal. It's a very small town. And I was standing outside the only cafe with my cousin who is white. And we were just talking, you know, we were just having a conversation. We were having fun, whatever. And this white lady stormed up to me, very angry. Mind you, I was like 14, 15. She stormed up to me and she said, "Excuse me, can I please get a menu?" And my cousin looked at me and I looked at him, and then we both looked at her, and I was just like, "I don't work here." And she was like, "Oh," and she stormed away. And I think that that moment was the first time in like my adolescence that I experienced blatant racism, like in my face, you know, to me. It's obvious that it happens behind my back and whatever, but blatant racism to my face, that was the first time that someone had just been like, assumed that because I was Black, I couldn't be the boss, you know? Because you're Black, you can't be the boss. Because you're Black, you can't be a guest at the restaurant. Because you're Black, you have to be the person that is serving you, basically. And I just felt like the whole attitude around her storming up to me was just like such a shocking moment for me, because I was like, wow, you know, you hear about these things and everything, and I have had quite a sheltered life, I will say, in regards to racism, because of how I was brought up and because of where I was brought up. But when it's in your face, they don't care where you're from, they don't care who your parents are, they just see Black and woman. And what Vera was saying earlier, I'm Black, I'm a woman, and I'm African. So it's just like lowest common denominator on all fronts. And I think that, I mean, that it has been something that I have had to acknowledge as I have grown older, just in my community and in my life. But there have been many, just little racist remarks and little racist comments that people make, not knowing that what they are saying is very racist. And I think that that is a big problem. Like, you don't know that you're racist.
We're going to get back to more questions in a second, but just to remind people that we're giving away 5 courses being run by Ian Furr worth nearly 5,000 Rand each, and they're going to go to the top 5 best questions that people have asked us this evening. So if you'd like to pose a question to Louis or to, I'm terrified I can't call you Lulu anymore, so to Noluvo, to Lael, please don't forget to put a question into the question section that we can pose on your behalf through to all of them. Louis, can I ask, your children,
Yes.
They're at Jewish day schools, are they not?
Yes.
Where do they go to school?
At Torah Academy.
And tell me, how have they experienced it? Have they experienced any racism there, or are they just accepted by all the other kids?
They've never experienced any racism at school. Basically, that because they've got friends, most of their friends, they like them. They like to go over to them. Their friends like to play with them. So for me, they enjoy every part of the school. I think the other thing is the school itself, because there's a lot of Ahavas Israel into the school. So loving each other, loving another Jew, it's for them, being Black is nothing. Just being a Jew is something else. So what brought them together is their Judaism. It's not because of their color. So they've never experienced that, as far as I know, and everything is fine for them. And that's it.
Lael, Jews have never generally associated themselves with color because they're Jews of every color and every hue. It just so happens by a quirk of fate that South African Jewry came primarily from Eastern Europe. But of course, we were acclimatized by the apartheid government to redefine ourselves and redefine ourselves as white, or at least the vast majority of Jews in the country. So you do have an unusual setup in your home. And how, when you guys go to shul, how are you accepted by the congregation? Have there been any issues? Do you feel completely at home?
So in the shuls that I go to, we felt completely at home. And we've been extremely well supported as a family with lots of diversity in it. So I think we've had a very wonderful experience actually, and we haven't had any problems in being Jewish as a mixed family. And it may be to do with the fact that I've been in sort of liberal congregations and mostly in Reformed shuls. So very often I've been at Orthodox shuls, and we've had really very much the same experience. But I do want to pick up on what you said, Howard, because I think that the fact that South African Jews are white, mostly, it is an important thing for us, I think, to acknowledge that we benefited from apartheid. And I don't only mean that as a community, I mean that as individuals. I think that white people, we need to reflect on what apartheid meant for us individually. And I think what it meant for us individually is it meant that we got a lot of privilege that other people didn't get. And we got that because we were white. And I think the starting point of being an anti-racist is to accept that you as a white person benefited, and you benefited unfairly. It may not have been your fault, but nonetheless you benefited. And I think accept that, and then say, fine, if I benefited from something that was desperately unfair to other people, what can I do? It's not to say someone should then feel guilty or flagellate themselves. Actually, what we should say is, how can I right a historical wrong? How can I contribute to overcoming injustice? And you can do that in so many ways, but you need to do it consciously and say, I want to contribute to empowering people who've been disempowered. I want to contribute to changing my own consciousness. I want to contribute to overcoming historical injustice because I know I benefited. I think that's an incredibly important starting point.
Amazing. Can I just tell you on a slightly different topic, we are raising money tonight to make sure that we can get school packs into the hands of kids who are less privileged. And Glenda Lansky has just told us that for the first 4 people to give a 500 Rand donation to back a pupil educational drive, she is going to give a design consultancy worth 5,000 Rand to each of the next 4 people who donate at least 500 Rand to this. So Dan, you putting on the screen again, please feel free, give a donation, Union of Jewish Women. Remember, it is tax deductible, and an amazing gesture by Glenda Lansky. Thank you so much for that. Really appreciate it. Noluva, there's a question that's come in, and the question for you is, do you speak any African languages? And if not, how do other Black people relate to you?
Right, so I guess that has been like a topic of conversation forever. So we are learning isiZulu, a part of school, but just a part of life in general. And I think quite a sad thing that I have bought into, yes, is the fact that so many of my Black friends and my African friends, parents speak an African language, but they don't. And I think we've had many conversations as Black youth, I'm 18, just about the fact that like we don't know the languages that our ancestors spoke. Like we just do not know those languages. And then thinking about it like, okay, now our kids and just the African languages dying effectively, because actually, whether people want to admit it or not, if you don't have English in the world that we live in today, it will be a lot harder for you. So the answer is no, but I am learning. We have been learning. My parents are learning. And I think that's an important thing as well, that white people learn as well, because we can speak English. So it's not, it's hard, okay, but if so many Black people and African people and minorities in general can learn to speak English, then surely it can be like some give and some take. Yeah. But I am not disregarding the fact that English is very much a language of power and just of the world, if you don't have English in your back pocket, it's going to be a bit more difficult for you wherever you go. So, you know, it's sad, it is, and it's something that like I do think about and I do acknowledge, and I am learning. So, you know, hopefully one day I am able to pass on that to my kids and my peers as well, because African languages are dying because parents are not teaching their Black African children those languages anymore. For reasons I don't know, you know, I don't have African parents, so I can't speak from that perspective, but I just know from like my friends' experiences that they are not being passed down. And that is something that is very sad, but yeah.
I'm going to ask Jade to jump in for in another minute, but I was thinking when your mom described your bat mitzvah, that Drake did an entire rap song, which was focused around his own bar mitzvah, and I think it's amazing that we should be taking people like yourself and like Drake and making people understand that there are Jews of every color and every background and every orientation and every ethnicity, and that we're all one big family of completely diverse, remarkable people who all subscribe to a common set of beliefs. And how do we do that? Lyle, help us in trying to do that.
So I think one important thing that we all need to think about as middle-class people is, you know, to come back to something that Vera and Pierre were talking about. How do kids learn racism? You know, it's one thing to talk to kids about racism and about not being racist, but the question is, what is their lived experience? So one of the questions is, do you interact with Black people in your life? Who are the Black people that you interact with? If the only Black people that your children see you interacting with are employees, then your children are learning something about your relationship with Black people. So I think it's really important that your children's experience of Black people isn't only people who work for the family. Otherwise they get, you know, they are used to a position of power over Black people because that's only Black people. If you treat your domestic worker in a way that is disrespectful, patronizing, or any of those things, then your child is learning from that. If you know very little about your domestic worker, you know, as an actual real whole human person and not just as a worker who has to get stuff done, your child is learning something from that. Have you ever visited your domestic worker's home? You know, a colleague of mine said to me a long time ago when Lulu was small, have you ever visited your domestic worker at home? And I hadn't. And she said to me, make a point once a year of visiting your domestic worker at home, because suddenly you'll see her differently. You'll see her with her neighbors. You'll experience her as a person in her own community. You won't just see her as a person in my house over whom I have some power and who is working for me. So I think that learning about race is a lived experience, and it can't only come from a book. It's got to come from whether you only have relationships with employees who are Black, and also how you treat that person. So I think many of us as middle-class people and as Jewish people, we have domestic workers in our homes, and how we treat them and the quality of the relationship that we have with them is really important.
Jade, I don't know if you've been following a lot of the questions that have been coming in the Q&A. Maybe you'd like to pose some of them to some of the panelists.
Yes, there's tons of questions coming in here, but I just want to say to Lulu, Louise, and Noel, thank you so much for those really honest stories. I've written down a ton of what you guys have spoken about tonight, and I think it was something that Reebok actually tweeted recently. They said, we are not asking you to buy our shoes. We are asking you to walk in somebody else's. And I think, you know, change can really start to come when we start walking in other people's shoes and seeing the challenges that people of color face every day. And exactly what you're talking about, well, there is such a misconception about race. Racism is not just mean words. Racism is those unconscious biases that exist. So thank you so much. There's a lot of questions coming in here. I can see someone says, oh, sorry, I don't think that's a question, Black kids at formerly white schools, example, Fairmount, H.A. Jack, etc., are learning Afrikaans and not Zulu because there aren't any Zulu teachers and or school does not offer Zulu. Can you comment on why that is? I'm not, I think I would probably pose that to Noel, or I'm not sure if anybody.
So we've had like very interesting, experiences and like some struggles about the learning of African languages. We live in Parkview, and even at the wonderful Parkview schools that our kids attended, Parkview Junior and Parkview Senior, we had like serious struggles over getting the school to teach isiZulu and then to take it seriously and to teach it properly and to be worried about whether kids were learning it properly. So it was really quite amazing to me that there wasn't more interest in it. But we have over the years seen, I think some progress in the teaching of isiZulu. But I think it's still generally taught without great seriousness. It's assumed that only first language speakers will be interested in taking those languages. So I think we have got a hell of a long way to go in the teaching of language. But I think there are some encouraging signs.
Thank you.
Lael, I don't know if it's too personal a question, but Liad Hadar says, first of all, P.S. Hi, Lael. And then, how did your family take your decision to adopt a Black child? Did you encounter any discomfort within your own family?
Yeah, so I must say that, I come from a wonderful family. Like my parents have been like absolutely wonderfully supportive, and I can say that my parents, like from the word go, just absolutely fell in love with our children. We adopted both Noluvo and Timbela when they were 4 months old, and both my parents, Marlene and Brian, just like from the word go, have been very involved in their lives, are very close to our children, and it is a great blessing of a relationship. My siblings as well, my sister lives in Israel, my brother's in Australia, so we don't see them as much, but very supportive. My sister in particular, very close to my kids, and visits often. And, we've been very blessed in that way. And then on Emilia's side of the family as well, we've had very, very positive experiences. So I think in a way also adopting and having mixed race families does also give, it creates an environment at schools and in other places where people become more used to mixed race families, and we all get the chance to be supportive of each other. But having said that, I'll just quickly share one experience we had on Sunday. This past Sunday, we had our own Like America moment in our household, which was like quite a terrifying thing. So Lulu's boyfriend, Norman, is Black, and he was visiting. He's 20 years old, and he's like a tall, can I say, he's a tall, good-looking guy, but he's a tall guy, and he went for a walk, so he was on the pavement outside our house, and his phone rang, so he started speaking on the phone, and as he was speaking on the phone, he walked up and down the pavement, speaking on his phone. Next thing, the police screech up to him, and behind them, the security company screech up, and they stop and they jump out and they surround him and like grab him and search him. And he's like, what is going on here? So it turns out that a neighbor of ours over the road saw this young Black man walking up and down the pavement, talking on a cell phone, and decided that what this person was doing was casing out the joint so that he could rob them. So he called the police and the security company, and they came and they like jumped on Norman and searched him. Now, luckily, they didn't put their knee on his neck. And I mean that quite seriously, because I think that's exactly what's happening in America. They did grab him and they did search him, but he's, when they said, what are you doing here? He said, well, actually, I'm visiting my girlfriend. She lives here. Would you like to come in? And meet her parents, who will explain to you that, I'm a guest here and actually more than that. So then they were cool about it and said, no, it's all fine. We think we understand what happened, and that was fine. But Emilia and I went over to chat to the neighbor in the evening because we were very upset about what had happened. And he said all those classic things that white people say. He said, we said to him, we tried to explain to him that we thought that he owed Norman an apology, and that what he had done was racist. He said, no, I'm not a racist. I don't hate Black people. So firstly, he understood racism to be when you hate Black people. No, it's not only that. It's also when you immediately perceive a Black person as a threat. You see a Black person and you say, they are here to rob me. That is racism. Racism is also when you, as you were saying earlier, see them as other and you assume they don't belong. What is he doing here? What is he doing on the street in Parkview? What he's doing on the street in Parkview is that he is walking on the street just like you. So we had this altercation with this guy and he just said all those classic things. He said, I don't see color. So firstly, it isn't true. If he had been a young white man of 20 walking up and down, been called. But secondly, it's not necessarily a good thing not to see color because you are not affirming what people's experience actually is. So I think, as Lulu was saying earlier, it's so much about racism can also be about very simple things. Can you say somebody's name? Are you perceiving them as a threat? Are you talking to them in a way that is patronizing and assumes that they are less intelligent than you? Are you assuming that they don't belong in the space where you belong, like on the street in Parkview? So I think that, you know, part of our experience of being a mixed family is just getting to understand that the lived experience of racism is not necessarily about being so like hated or about having something overt, but it might be about someone assuming that you work in a shop, that you are a threat to them, that you don't belong. And I think that's a lesson for us as white people to say, the racism that I have in me might not be an obvious thing, but it might still be very hurtful to another person.
Lael, I have only one thing to say in summation. What sort of mother takes their family on holiday to the Free State? Come, seriously. I want to thank all our panelists. I think it's been the most remarkable evening. I think we've all learned so much and been able to share so many experiences that I think people will be able to take away. But most importantly, we've been able to start a very important dialogue and conversation within our own community and within the broader community that I think will be so valuable for many of the people who've watched us this evening. Jade, do you want to sum up what you've learned tonight?
Thanks, Howie. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you to the platform. I've learned so much tonight from everybody and everybody's different perspectives, and I'm just thrilled that we could open this conversation. I actually invited Dr. Robin DeAngelo, who you might have seen on CNN recently, who's written a book called White Fragility and has done some remarkable work around race. Unfortunately, she couldn't join us on the webinar, but she did tell me to take up 3 tasks, and I'm going to share them with you guys because they really hit home for me. And the first one was we should spend the rest of our lives grappling with the question of what it means to be white and how our race has shaped every aspect of our lives from our first breath. Number 2, how have we managed to become fully functional professional adults and not know what to do about racism? And number 3, we need to listen to people of color. We need to read their books. We need to watch their videos, and we need to turn our attention to what they've been telling us for centuries. So if 10 families go away tonight and open a conversation with their children about racism, we will be moving the needle forward in South Africa. COVID-19, assume that we have it, don't spread it, and be willing to change our lives to get rid of it. So thank you to our panelists, thank you to Howie, and thank you to everybody watching there tonight. I hope we can really start some meaningful conversations.
It's been a remarkable evening. Dan, if you could join us, you've been looking at all of the questions as they've come in. Do you want to make some decisions tonight, or do you want to mull over it this evening and notify our winners rather tomorrow?
Yeah, I'm going to mull over it. There were great questions, so many comments, so many questions coming through on Zoom, on the chat, in the Q&A, as well as in YouTube. So I've been trying to monitor everything, and I started coming up with a short list, and the short list became a medium length list, and it became longer and longer. So I'm going to mull over it, sleep on it, and we'll advise tomorrow morning.
That is amazing. We'll notify people. Can I put in one request? I saw someone very early on to say, can a head principal be eligible for this prize? I think that's the best question that I saw the entire evening. So if I can just put in my 2 cents worth, I know the final decision is completely yours. So just to remind everyone, this has been brought to you by the South African Jewish Report, and over the next few days we have a number of remarkable panels. On Saturday evening we're going on the rock and roll journey through Jewish music from Streisand to Shweki. So please join us 8 p.m. on Sunday for that. And then at 5:45 on, that's on Saturday. At 5:45 on Sunday evening, we've got Nir Bakat, the former mayor of Jerusalem, and the former deputy IDF chief of staff, Yair Golan. They're going to, in fact, be debating the issue of annexation or sovereignty, and Paula Sleer will be hosting that panel for us, and that will be at 5:45 on Sunday evening. And then on Wednesday, we'll be tackling the issue of gender-based violence. So we've got a packed program ahead. Thank you so much to everyone for joining us this evening. Really, it's getting dangerous out there. Stay safe, stay sanitized, and we'll see you on Saturday night.
Thanks, Howie. Thanks, everybody. Good night.
Thanks, Jade. Good night. Good night to everyone.